Hello everybody, this is Global Warming Skeptic here to tell you why libertarian philosophy is the only logical ideology. And to start with, libertarianism is a pretty broad brush, so I will be defending my personal flavor of libertarianism specifically, but note that in general, libertarianism, no matter what flavor, is more rational than liberalism and conservatism in any variety. And let me explain why. Now, first of all, libertarianism in general is better because pretty much liberalism and conservatism both seek to expand government's role in society. The differences are just in what the values are. Conservatism seeks to make a more secure society based on free market economics, or quote free market economics, which is not actually free, and of the security of a nation. Of course, conservatives want a stronger defense, and they want various types of funding of their own. For example, of government enforcement of the rights of the religious. Liberals, they're kind of the opposite. They want a smaller military, but they want a larger social structure and impose their values on the population. As bad as conservatism is, liberalism takes it to a whole new level because they seek to impose their values and overrule the values of God and of personal individuals. They believe that the government should impose its version or their version of morality onto the entire population. Basically, libertarianism gets both of these right. It suggests that we should have a less interventionist military at the very least, and also a smaller social structure where the values are not decided by the government, but instead are decided by individuals. To me, this is the value of free will. If you consider free will to be of net benefit to mankind, then it's very difficult to shake the idea that a society based on human free will is the best society for humanity. Now that we've gotten that out of the way, I want to explain how you can take this overboard. Because libertarianism comes in many different varieties. There are moderate libertarians who just believe that the government should have less function than it does now, or a little more state control, basically saying anything less that the government can do would be good and they'd be happy with it. And of course, there are, on the opposite side of the spectrum, anarchists who now call themselves libertarians, who believe that the function of government is not required. Now, let me explain to any libertarians watching how you could take this overboard, because there is another part to this equation here, and it is human nature. And basically, human nature is based on hierarchies. You have the ruling class and you have the subjugated class. This is true in all tribal societies, all governments, And even in family arrangements, you have one person who decides what the bills are paid on and who decides the direction of the finances of the family unit. Very rarely do you have any kind of direct democracy, even in something as simple as a family setting. And so this cannot work. Anarchy cannot work because even if you get an entire population in a vacuum to say, yes, we agree with a direct democracy, no government approach, a pure, I guess it'd be like a pure communist type structure, or at least Marx's idea of communism, where the state was abolished and everything be based on common consensus. Whatever you believe about Karl Marx, it's unrealistic, and anarchy is unrealistic, because if you have a power vacuum, what's going to happen is somebody else is going to come in with force and dictate the rules that you live by, thus eliminating your anarchist society. And in fact, this is what almost always happens. In every anarchy in history, or every society that has had almost no government, you have had other governments come in and decide they rule this land, and they have the means of enforcing their claim on a particular piece of land, and the anarchist society has no claim because they have no means of defense, because they have no organization, no hierarchy, nothing that effective humans have. So, and basically this goes to the fundamental issue. If you look at the nature of government, think about where it likely came from. You had community farmers around the major river valleys of the world, the Nile, Tigris, Euphrates, the Yangtze, the Indus Valley, all this. Humans congregated around these and formed their farms, farming communities, because they had to live next to each other in order to grow their food, because they lived in such concentrated areas. So some form of hierarchy had to form in order for these people to coexist. And this is where government comes from. And then you have other like groups that say they want to be more upriver, have the clean water. They will try to impose their organized government structure on those other people. And so the people upriver have to defend themselves. And that's where you get the concept of defending your organized way of life. Because it's like I said, where there is no organization, where there is no government, there will be another group of humans that will try to lay claim to that land, and without a universal single voice of a government, it's always going to happen. It's so government, what I'm trying to say is, and I'm doing a bad job, but what I'm saying is that government is based on the evils of humanity. It is an expression of humanity's flaw, that we desire power, we have ambition, and we are greedy. It is a manifestation of all of those things, and that we live in hierarchies of the subjugated and the ruling class. And so this is why I believe in a minimalist, statist libertarianism. Whereas you have power concentrated at the local level with as small of a government as is necessary to protect the freedoms of its people. Because, of course, you need a military in order to ensure that other governments with militaries are not going to lay claim to what you have. And you need basic protections to make sure that other humans don't try to claim the freedoms of others or impose their will on other humans. You have to have a government that does both of those things. Because if you don't, then people are just going to seize power for themselves. You can't have a power vacuum. And it's not human nature, and it's not going to work. There will always be somebody who claims that power. And so what you have to do as a government, and what should be most of the function of government, is to protect those rights, provide basic protections, provide basic assistance where needed, and where there's assistance needed, it should be provided locally as much as possible. The only function of the federal government should be, well, the only functions should be to settle interstate disputes, to provide a defense, what am I thinking? To provide a defense interface, I guess, because the word's not coming to me. And to defend the country from outsiders. Yeah, infrastructure. I don't know why I wasn't thinking of it, but to provide a basic defense infrastructure, which could include a highway system. Not entirely against that if it's for defense purposes. But most of the power should be in the states and localities where you need social programs. I'm not against social programs, but what I am against is one size fits all federal government, which does not provide adequate needs for people. For example, let me use the minimum wage as an example. People are shouting for a raise in minimum wage, $15 an hour, whatever you want. I don't think people are aware of this, but $15 an hour, there's places in this nation where, such as New York City, where even $15 an hour is too low. And so here's what you have with, for example, a federal minimum wage. You have a minimum wage that is so low that people can't even afford to pay their rent with it, much less afford to feed themselves. And you have at the opposite side of the spectrum what would happen in states like Nebraska, where the minimum wage would be so absurdly high because of the difference of standard of living that it would harm especially small businesses. And considering the rate that small businesses are leaving, we do not need that. So a federal minimum wage does not make one bit of sense, because it's going to be too low for some areas, too high in others, and what you're doing is you're actually alleviating responsibility from localities to provide a decent standard of living or a good balance of wage versus business. And so, for example, it's something like minimum wage. If the federal government even eliminated minimum wage and did nothing, then that actually puts more pressure on the states that never raise their minimum wage, such as Georgia and Montana, which have a $5.15 minimum wage. it puts pressure on them and their politicians to raise minimums to what their standards ought to be, which will be a better fit than the one size fits all federal government, when we all know one size does not fit all. And it would be even better if it were at the county and city level setting the minimum ones, because they, more than anybody, would know their county's standard of living. So basically the thing is this, is that federal government does an ineffective job. And you could see this in what the minimum wage too. You could see it in, for example, education. If you look at the skyrocketing cost of education, public spending for the United States, I don't think people understand this, because they keep harping on funding education. Did you guys know, and I'm talking to liberals here, that the United States is #1 per student, mind you, in education funding on planet Earth? We are #1, not just in OPEC, but everywhere in the world. We are the #1 funder in education. What do we rank in OPEC? 30th. Yeah, we rank 30th. The highest ranking we've had is basically being mediocre in the past few years. We are awful, and we put more money in our public education than anybody, especially our college education. We spend more, we spend 1.5 times what second place, I believe it's Sweden, does. And this is the Institute for Educational Sciences reporting on this. This isn't just shooting off with the mouth. Statistics do back this up. We are #1 in funding in education. Again, let me emphasize that, #1. And our costs have been exploding. I looked at something, I can't cite it for you right now. I'll put it in the comments of the description if somebody challenges me on it, but ever since Bill Clinton's term, the federal government went from spending close to zero on education to at least 4 times. We went from spending nothing to, shoot, like tens of thousands per student federally, and a lot of that's Common Core. And has it helped us? No. None of it's helped us. We keep expanding Pell Grants, student loans, and guarantees, and aggressively enforcing paying off loans through potential jail time now because of the loan guarantee. It's not working. Healthcare, the same thing. Medicare expansion after Medicare expansion after Medicaid expansion, Obamacare, Medicare Part D, all of that. What's happened with our healthcare? Has it gotten better? Have our outcomes gotten better? Has the standard, have the life expectancies gone up compared to the world because we're spending more and more per person on healthcare? No. We've seen a decline in all of these services. Economic growth, education, median wage, all of this has plateaued and is declining. I was watching a debate between Richard Nixon and John F. Kennedy. I believe it was their second debate in 1960. And of course, the debates were a lot more sophisticated. They talked more about issues. But there was one thing that really caught me, and it's just going to burn in my brain. Likely, if things don't get better, it's going to burn in my brain for the rest of my life. And that is, they were arguing whether we were number one or number two in education. Wouldn't that be beautiful to argue right now? A beautiful thing to argue. Whether we are first or second in education. I'd love to be up there with the Singapores, Hong Kong, South Korea, and all the places that do things right. Have teacher competition, no meddling unions able to make it impossible for performance-based firings. That would be beautiful. But since we have so much government meddling, so much power goes to the unions, and what happens? We get what we have now. And that's sad to see. And I'm against government really dictating any standards, because that's another problem with our education system is you have bureaucrats who dictate the standards. You have bureaucrats who say you have to take 3 history classes for your business major. You know, straight out of high school, you got to take 3 business classes. It's called the ACR, all college requirements. I had to do that when I went to school, and it's just, you don't gain anything for your career from it. What it is indoctrination at a public level. Universities get this money, and what are they encouraged to do? The educators are encouraged to be cultural icons. They're encouraged to not educate, but instead to preach. And that's essentially what it boils down to, because you have the state, which is forcing its corrupt agenda upon our institutions. There's a lot more I could get into, but I gotta end this sometime. But I just want to say this. Don't be afraid of having personal freedoms. Don't be forced into believing that human generosity is impossible and that we have to have a government to force us to be charitable. Oh, here's one more. Hang on. One more statistic I forgot to bring up. Poverty rate. Now, ever since Lyndon Johnson, war on poverty, right? We're going to end poverty. We're going to pass all these social programs. We're going to give all the poor all this stuff, and all these programs get through. What's our poverty rate in 1964, when he declared a war on poverty, was 15%. In 2015, our poverty rate was 14.5%. Our poverty rate since the, quote, war on poverty has never gone below 11%, never gone above 15%. And this is despite more and more entitlements, more and more everything being pushed by the government. And I'll explain why that is, too. Because here's another statistic I'm going to throw at you. The average salary for an American worker is about $33,500. You know what the average government worker makes? And note that a lot of government workers, they get lots of vacation time, lots and lots of vacation time, lots and lots of health care benefits, insurance. They get intangibles up the rear end. You know what the average government worker makes? $80,000 per year. That's almost 3 times more than the average worker. And you got, for example, with Congress, congressmen make between 170 and 220,000 a year, I believe, depending on if they're a ranking member or if they're a majority leader, majority whip, what have you. And Congress only they work less than half the year. Most of the year, they get off because they're not in session, and they have all the interns do all their office work for them. So what are they doing? Maybe they spend a little bit of time with their constituents, maybe a little bit of time reading emails or snail mails, what have you, but most of that time's off, and they're making $200,000 a year. That's top 5% income, and they're not working for it. You know, pretty much Donald Trump would put the work ethic to shame, and for a billionaire, I think that'd be kind of sad, because I don't know how hard Trump works, but it's obviously a lot harder than that. But anyhow, I'm just going to end this here because, quite frankly, there is no argument for partisan politics anymore. The two-tiered system of liberalism and conservatism. We need real solutions, and solutions that don't involve government getting involved in literally every single facet of our lives. We need solutions to get the government out, increase personal and economic freedoms, and put the pressure, because remember, this is about personal morality. This isn't about scapegoating responsibilities for the fellow man, taking care of the poor, the sick. No, it's quite the opposite. Because to be a generous person, you can't just have a gun held to your head and say, pay up, we're going to take your money and we're going to be as generous as we want with it. No. Generosity means willfully deciding without any pressure that you are going to help the sick or poor or homeless individual. Because that's where human decency comes from. It comes from our moral obligations, our moral duties to help one another out. And when you put a government between that, people become less generous. And so, when I'm talking about libertarianism, when I'm talking about a minimalist statist society, I'm talking about putting the pressure back on local governments, back on people to be human again, to be people again. To say that out of the goodness of my heart, I am going to go out and I am going to help these people. And yeah, you do need a few minimal safety nets. I don't believe in going completely without safety nets and 100% depending on charity, but anything beyond a minimal standard of living needs to be charitably provided, and people need to be encouraged to be self-accountable and help each other out and stop running to the government to fix every problem, to satisfy every need in society. Because at the end of the day, we're all humans, and we need to encourage the good parts of humanity and not encourage the bad parts, which the government is a manifestation, again, of the evil of humanity. It is a necessity based on the fact that humans are evil creatures, and thus will forcefully govern if there is a power vacuum. Thanks for listening, guys. God bless.